of tartar. Okay, the stage you add cream of tartar is at the very beginning, or the foaming, just starting to foam. Cream of tartar. Cream of tartar, which is acid, you could add lemon juice, the same, just a little bit of lemon juice to stabilize the foam so it doesn't collapse. And then you don't add the sugar until it's in the soft peak stage. Don't add them all at one time, but one spoonful at a time, allowing some time to rest in between so the sugar gets absorbed into the egg white. So if that's the case, everything should go well. You shouldn't have any problems until you whip it until it's stiff. And you know, how can you tell when the egg foam is when the egg white gives you soft peak versus, I have it in the, let me draw it for you. Soft peak would be something like that. Just dip a little bit, not too much, and let go of it. Soft peak like this. Okay, it's not straight up, but a stiff peak would be like this. I'm exaggerating it. Okay, so at the soft peak, you can start adding sugar, one spoonful at a time, until it forms a stiff peak, but not too long after that. You should take it off. You're ready. Don't beat it until it's dry. This is soft peak, and this is stiff peak, and the next stage is dry. You don't want the dry stage. By the time you reach dry stage, there's nothing you could do. You cannot incorporate anything else. It's too stiff. It's just too dry already. Okay? So the rest is if you just follow the instruction, we had good results, and you shouldn't have any problems. Okay, so we're done with eggs, milk and egg products, because I wanted to demonstrate egg whites, the beating of egg white foam, and egg yolk. Sponge cake, I gave you sponge cake recipe because I hate to have you use only egg white and all the egg yolks get wasted. So sponge cake uses both egg white, you beat the egg white, and you beat the egg yolk separately. Egg yolk, you could beat it with sugar, except that it's not going to foam up as much. The volume is not nearly as big as this. But sometimes, if they're good at it, they could actually get it to a very good volume also. So you remember, the larger is the volume, the better is the final product. The lighter is the final product. That means you're able to keep the air in, beat the air in, and maintain it that way. So usually, before you put it in the oven, you already know whether it's going to be a good product or not by taking a look at the volume. The larger it is, the better it is. Okay, so let me see. I was talking about sponge cake. And then you combine the two. You use a little bit of cake flour. With the sponge cake, you use just a little bit of baking powder. That's all you need, very little. With sponge cake, no other leavening agent at all. So the only leavening agent will be air, the air you're beating. And when you put it in a pan, basically, you don't want to grease the sides of the pan. And if you want, you could grease the bottom a little bit, but not the sides, because you want the batter or the egg white to creep up. You want some roughage along the edge so it could climb up. Okay. So the rougher it is, the better it is. The higher up, it could, just like climbing a ladder. The better it is, it climb all the way up before you put it in. Then the volume is even better. So everything depends on the volume that you get before you put it in the oven. So don't grease the sides of the pan. And you can grease the bottom. But we'll talk about cakes today. We have two topics today. Let me see. I think I'm, 10 after, so everybody's with me now. We have two topics today. One is quick breads, muffins, popovers, and cream puffs. And the other one is cakes, conventional method of making cakes. So we're on quick breads, which is muffins, popovers, and cream puffs. All right. Any questions before I start the class about the labs you have this week? Actually, that's all you'll be making because you already made quite a few. You made the meringue last week, and you made other products already, eggs, other egg products. So that's all that we have you do this week. Next week, we'll be covering new products. Okay, let's take a look at the ratio or the ingredients we use for quick products. What do we mean by quick products? We call quick products because it's very, very quick to make. Basically, you combine all of the dry ingredients together, and then you combine all of the wet ingredients together, and you pour one into the other, and then you mix. And then the mixing process is very important. I will tell you more about it. So that's why it's called quick products, so fast. You mix the two, you put it in the oven, it's ready. It's ready for you to eat. Okay, first of all, let's take a look at the muffin method. Muffins method is used for making muffins or other quick breads. Okay, so let's take a look at the ingredients we use. Flour, 1 cup, and liquid, about ½ a cup. Now, I put these in bold for you to kind of remember this, because this is a very crucial ratio. 1 to 2 flour, 1 portion, 1 cup to ½ a cup. This particular ratio is a sticky, very sticky ratio, and it is very easy to make mistake, and yet it's easy to finish it off. If you know it, it's very easy to do. If you don't know it, if you make a mistake, it's a mistake. Okay, and let me go on with this first. Eggs, 1 to 2 eggs. We already talked about these ingredients in Principles of Baking. Okay, eggs would help with the structure. And fat, we talked about fat. 1 to 2 tablespoons of fat we use. And fat is to tenderize the product. If we don't have fat, the product will be tougher. Remember, we said the fat breaks up the gluten strands. Gluten strands are always tough. Remember, we talked about that. So the more fat you put in, the more tender it is. That's why I said if somebody tells me that try these cookies, these are really good, so tender, it melts in your mouth, I would know immediately probably has a lot of fat. Okay, and also sweet sugar too. Sugar fights for the water. Remember, gluten strands need water to develop into tough strands. So if you add sugar to it, sugar fights for the water. Sugar likes water also. So it fights for the water. So sugar, basically, we're going to be talking more about how much sugar. Over here, actually, it's only 1 to 2 tablespoons. The more sugar you put in, the more tender it's going to be. And it's going to basically break up the gluten strands also. And baking powder, we talked about baking powder as being a leavening agent. So 1½ teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And if you take a look at the ratio here, generally speaking, for this particular product, muffin product, okay, for every cup of flour, we use approximately 1 to 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So, thank you. Okay, so now we go to the next slide on making muffins. Do you think the muffins will be very easy to make? Yes, it is very easy to make if you just know the principles of making it. All right, mixing. We basically mix all of the liquids together, all the liquid ingredients, including the eggs and fat. If the fat is solid, then we melt it. So fat is melted, combine that with eggs and the liquid. So all the liquids are combined in one bowl, and then they are all added to dry ingredients such as sifted flour. We already talked about flour should be sifted anyway. Baking powder as a leavening agent, and sugar could be could be mixed in there also. And so I asked the question, what is the leavening agent in that particular recipe, the previous recipe? What is the leavening agent here? What is the leavening agent? Baking powder. Okay. As I said, I'm bound to have a question in the final exam to ask you, these are the products, which leavening agent do we use in that particular recipe? So right away you know it's baking powder. Okay, so all of the liquids are combined, I mentioned, and all of the dry ingredients are combined in another bowl. But of course the flour should have been already pre-sifted, baking powder mixed with sugar, and then leavening agent you already know is baking powder. Now we mix the two together. When we mix it together, if you take a look at the ratio, okay, this particular ratio is important. Flour, that's why I put it in bold. Flour is 1 cup and liquid is half a cup. So the ratio is what? 2 to 1. Is it 2 to 1 if you double? Yeah. With that particular ratio, you have to be very careful that we don't over-stir. Do not over-stir. So that particular ratio, as such, 1 cup to half a cup of liquid, gives you a very sticky dough. So when you have a sticky dough, okay, you are having basically, why are we worried about the sticky dough? We're worried, when it's sticky, we're worried about overstretching the gluten. Remember, the gluten is always the villain. We try in every way to make the product tender. If we make the product tender, we add fat to it. And if we add sugar to it, we make the product also tender. Another way to do it is not to stretch it too much. Yes?
So if you're making pancakes and
Coming up.
a lot, then they become really chunky?
Exactly. I'm going to just talk about that. Such a common mistake. Yeah, I would talk about that. But making muffins, let's talk about a plain muffin. And you'll be doing that next week. I would like you to do the muffins the regular way, not to stir it too much. So how much stirring do you do? It's a stirring. Do not over-stir, because gluten develops readily with a 2 to 1 ratio, 2 portions of flour and 1 portion of liquid. So the batter should still be lumpy, which is what a lot of people don't know. And we could easily overdevelop the gluten with too much stirring. And that's why in the recipe, it would tell you, you stir only 10 times. They tell you how many strokes, because if they don't tell you, a common person would just kind of beat. Oh, there's still lumps. Let me beat more. There's still lumps, just like pancakes. Okay, Max, you were telling me, is that the same, exactly the same concept? Right, I'll come back to that again. So do not over-stir, and the batter will still be lumpy. Don't worry about it. These small lumps will get cooked out anyway. Will be cooked, and it's going to be nice and fluffy, actually. Okay. The only problem is when we over-stir, give too much stirring, and we are overdeveloping the gluten, then the pancake is tough. Okay. So when you go to the pancake house, IHOP, why is it their pancakes are so tender, so light, so velvety? They have taken all these into consideration, and also the buttermilk is always the best because of the acid is already there. All they have to do is put a little bit of baking soda to maximize, of course, the leavening power there, so that it's nice and light. And if you go and take a look, they never overstir, and the batter is still lumpy. Okay? If you overstretch it, you overdevelop the gluten strands. Then it gets tough when you do. So Over-stirred muffin, how do we know it's tough already? First of all, you could taste it, it's tough. But when you break up a muffin that's been over-stirred, you see the peaks and tunnels. I'm going to, erase this and show you what it looks like. If it's a good muffin, it's going to look cauliflowery like this. And nice, should be nice and tender. But if you over-stir it, it's going to look like this. Smooth like this. Because, and then you open it up, you see all kinds of tunnels. The tunnels are from what? What are the tunnels from? Gas, yeah, the gas trying to escape going through the gluten strands. So these are all the gluten strands that have been stretched by the gas coming out. So when you bite into it, it's tough. It's tougher than it should be. Okay, so this will not have. So in the lab, I will ask, when I do the recipes, I will ask you, half of a batch will be regular. Mix it, and you just, the recipe will tell you how many strokes, or I will tell you how long you, just so that you mix it a little, you could bake it. And the other one, we're going to ask you to beat it and beat it until all the lumps are out. And then you try to make it, and it's going to be tough. So often you think it's so easy to make, it should not be a problem. But because it's always in our head that the batter should be smooth to some people. So this is when the problem occurs. I've had, you know, when I make pancakes at home, I like to make buttermilk pancakes for the same reason. If I could duplicate IHOP's pancakes, I would be very happy if I could do that. But I always have to watch, often if I have company, they say, well, Janet, let me do this. My sister said, let me do this. That's something I could do. But you got to watch it while you're doing something else. Here she is, keeps beating. Oh, there's still lumps. Maybe, oh, hey, wait, this is it. Stop, you know. It's already overbeaten. Okay, so unless if you know what you're doing, you have to instruct the person how to do it. So overstirring results in peaks and tunnels. First of all, it looks bad. And second, you taste it, you should be able to tell the difference. Okay. Now, remember I said, if you put a lot of fat to it, remember fat? Okay, I'm going to do it on the other side. If these are the gluten strands, if you put a lot of fat to it, fat is going to cut through the gluten strands so that it won't be tough. So if there's a recipe that uses a lot of fat, it's great. It's always tender because it's going to prevent the gluten strands to develop into tough, long strands. And remember, if you have a lot of sugar, it fights for the water. Okay, and again, for the same reason, it's going to toughen. There isn't enough water, and it fights, whether you fights for the water, basically it interferes with the gluten development. It's also going to tenderize. So when you buy commercially made muffins, it's going to taste just like cake, I could tell you that. Because they put so much fat in it, they put so much sugar in it, because they don't want to get it to this stage, you understand? It's easy to get it to this stage if you overstir. So if you put a lot of fat to it, a lot of sugar to it, it's not going to be like that. You can mix it as long as you want. It's not going to be like that. It would still be like this. So when you buy muffins, generally speaking, I just thought that it's always too sweet and too much fat. You can only eat so much of it, but they do it on purpose because they give you a really nice and tasty result like this. It looks good. And they could sell well with a lot of fat there. They could keep a little longer. But it's almost like a cake product. Really, it's not a muffin product. A real muffin should not be very sweet. A real muffin should not be too fat in the content. A real muffin should be eaten actually with breakfast, with butter and jam. The Europeans eat muffins like that, the traditional muffins, with limited, small amount of fat, small amount of sugar, and you eat it for breakfast. So this is but here in the United States, when you buy commercially made, somehow Americans are always very, very busy. They don't make muffins. Actually, it's a very easy product to make. And then the best way to do, a lot of the recipes are overloading the recipe with sugar and fat for that reason. Easy for them to make and easy, of course, for you to make a good product. Okay, so let me see. So too much fat, too much sugar will interfere with gluten. Okay, development. So the results, let me see. Am I losing another line? Yep. Let me see. How do I bring it back up? Okay, I have this. So, okay, here. And the cake. Okay, so the results are sweeter in your cup. Ooh, I don't know why. Gee whiz. Stay there. I cannot touch it. Once I touch it, you see, it's going to do that again. Okay, I don't want to touch it. I'll just read it to you. Yeah.
My backpack is really heavy.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, thank you. Maybe to tie it. Actually, I have a bag. I didn't think about that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So the last line is that results are, when you put a lot of sugar, a lot of fat in it, results are sweeter, more tender, and it's more of a cake-like product. And that's what we usually eat when you buy it. So it's high in calories is what I'm saying. Sometimes it's more of if it's a snack, it's okay. We don't eat it like the Europeans do for breakfast. Or is it going up?
Well, I can make it so that it stays down.
Oh, well, thank you.
Shorter.
Oh, thank you very much. So are there any questions? So we will make, I'm going to choose a recipe that's more traditionally a muffin recipe that you eat for breakfast. And then I'm going to ask you to overbeat it. And then you could tell me the difference. Oh, great. Thank you. Oh, you know, I could actually do that. Mine is pretty. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. All of you being very helpful. Okay, so it's very easy. Muffin, you think it's one of the easiest, that's why it's called quick bread, one of the easiest items to make. Basically, you sift the flour, you measure, you sift it with baking powder. So from that recipe, what is a leavening agent in muffins, by the way? Baking powder, correct, yeah. When you sift flour, you're introducing air. So we do have air as a secondary. Basically, air is always there because we always sift flour, right? But if I ask you for the main leavening agent, it would be baking powder, right? So you sift the flour together with baking powder and the salt, like the way it is in step 1. Step 2, that's all the dry ingredients. And step 2 will be all the wet ingredients. In another bowl, you beat the eggs, you add the milk and the oil. As simple as that. And step 3 is basically add the wet mixture, all the wet ingredients. Pour that directly into the dry ingredients and mix. Now mix just to blend, that's all. So the mixture should be lumpy. If it's smooth, it's already too late. Now you fill the grease, now you fill the batter in muffin tins. Fill it to 2/3 full, and then you bake at pretty high temperature, 400 degrees, very fast. And it's very good. But if you examine the recipe, you see how much sugar they put in. They ask you to put in how much fat they put in, and you know what it's going to be more like a cake product. But yet, if it's more like a cake product, you could beat it for as long as you want. You're not going to get the tunnels anyway. It's not going to be tough. It's okay. But it's just too rich, too much fat in content. Okay? So this is all muffins, the first item. Any questions? Okay. Oh, by the way, muffin characteristics. They should have, the grains are not, they have a kind of a rough surface anyway, like a cauliflower, basically. The grain is not very fine, kind of rough, like you're wearing a hat, like with a rough surface, you know. So the surface has a pebbly, rough appearance. It's rounded, but not peaked. Once it's peaked, means that the gluten strands have been stretched and stretched. And when it gets stretched and stretched, it gets tough. Okay? So it should not be peaked. All right. Now, I got this picture from the internet, but to me, this picture is not a very good picture of the traditional muffins. I could tell, but I couldn't find a picture that has the look of a traditional muffin. Why am I saying that? Can you guess why I'm complaining about this photo? To me, this looks more cake-like rather than bread-like for breakfast. I think this photo, because the Americans think muffins already like a cake-like product. They put way too much fat, way too much sugar in, and this is what it looks like to prevent the tunnel formation. You understand? So I could not find anything. I would have to go to Europe to find an internet. Well, it's universal anyway, I don't know why. But anyway, I just wanted, especially for some of them, it should look like cauliflower, rough looking like, okay? All right. Now, quick breads. When we say quick breads, muffins is a typical example. Another product that's very much like muffins is what Max just told me. How about pancakes? Okay. Why did you ask me this question about pancakes? Did you experience pancakes as being lumpy, the batter?
I like my pancakes chewy.
Oh, you like it chewy. Okay.
Yeah, and so I guess I've just been overmixing them all the time.
Mm-hmm. It's very easy. We always do, if you're not cautious. But try. Do you like the pancakes that we, go to IHOP or another pancake house? I love their pancakes because they're so tender, fluffy.
I like the chewy.
You like the chewy, so the chewy would be what you chewy the gluten, which is okay, because all-purpose flour has a significant amount of gluten. Sure. Okay. All right. So sure, you could do that. So pancakes, one cup. The liquid is about 2/3, not quite half the amount. So I'm not going to ask it. So if I ask you questions, I would ask you only muffins. That's why I gave it to you in bowl. Basically, I tell you what I'm going to be asking you. The rest of it, once you start cooking or baking, you'll know which one falls in which category by looking at the proportion. So it's 2/3, almost there. Like it. Egg, 1. Fat, 1 tablespoon. Sugar, 1 teaspoon. And baking powder. So it's almost that. So I just wanted to show you the pancakes is the same thing. And there would be small lumps if you like it to be nice and tender, velvety and tender, and not chewy. But if you like it chewy, like Max does, sure. Okay, it's the gluten strands then. Okay, you got it? Okay, so now that we've talked about the muffins, I like to talk about popovers. We'll be making popovers also next week. Popover is quite different. If you take a look at the flour, you should know I'm sorry. I should put this in bold. Popover and cream puffs are all in the same category. Can you change that to bold? You should know 1-to-1 ratio. The 1-to-1 ratio means 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of liquid. When it's 1-to-1 ratio, there's so much liquid to it. 1-to-1, that means more liquid when compared with muffin recipe. Okay. Because of the high proportion, 1-to-1 ratio, high proportion of liquid, okay, you know that it's not going to be sticky. The batter will not be sticky. In fact, you see the batter basically is watery. Okay. Popovers contain a high proportion of liquid, 1-to-1 ratio. There's so much water there that the leavening agent, if I were to ask you, Popover, I think I will ask you this, the leavening agent is actually steam. That's why when you see Popover, the inside is all hollow. You have to put it initially in the oven at high temperature. High temperature. Are you reading newspaper, Lawrence? I would appreciate if you listened to my lecture instead. Thank you. You could put it away. Thank you. Just like students studying or doing your math, I would appreciate it. Especially this is an optional class. You don't have to come to my class. You could view it at home just the same. However, I like you to come to class because I have interpersonal interaction with you, and I see whether you understand, whether you have any questions or not. But while you're here, I hope you are here to listen to my lecture, okay? You don't mind my saying that, right? Okay, thank you. So Popover has a 1-to-1 ratio, has a lot of water. Because it has a lot of water, 1-to-1 ratio, it creates the steam. And initially, this steam has to be driven or produced in a very hot oven. So initially, in the initial stage, we have to turn the oven to a very high stage. Okay, we'll talk about the recipe in just a little while. Leavening agent is steam. There is there any leavening agent other than that? Take a look. There's no baking powder here, no baking powder, and no sugar. Because Popover is basically the same as what? Have you had Yorkshire pudding with prime rib dinner? That's Popover, actually. You eat it with bread. When you go to England, when you eat roast beef, that's where you get Popover. It's not sweet. And it's so good with the beef gravy. Of course, they always overcook their beef, which I didn't like. That's okay. They cook it too well, it's done stage, but the gravy is very nice. So they soak the Popover with the gravy, and it's very good. So Popover, but Popover here, where do you eat Popover? Very commonly served. Sometimes at home, of course, you could eat Popover. You put butter and jam on it. It's very good. Or another place you have it is what? Popover is at a steakhouse, prime rib house. Have you been to prime rib house? Yorkshire pudding? Have you had Yorkshire pudding? Have you been to, next time when you go to prime rib house, roast beef house, it's English, of course, roast beef, supposedly. They always serve you, we call it Popover, okay, Yorkshire pudding with dinner, okay? Oh, sometimes they do it flat, yeah. But when we do it, you see it, it could pop up really nice and big. No, sometimes you see Popover, why is it it's flat? They could make it bigger. Okay, the fat, actually, sometimes they put beef fat into it. Sometimes it's too greasy. I like it to be less, It's like a muffin, but it pops up. It's like flat. It's because it's flattened already. It should be nice and high, like a big hat. Okay. But initially, when it comes out of the oven, it should be nice and big. Yeah. But then afterwards, and especially when you put, you like to put gravy on it, so they flatten it anyway and put gravy on it, and that's what they think is good. But I like to eat it like that. And in Europe, they just eat it with butter and jam. Even at home for breakfast, you could do that. Okay. So there's no, take a look at the recipe. No sugar, no baking powder. So over here, what is, let me change it to the other slide. 1-to-1 ratio. What is the leavening agent there? Did you see the other one? Where is the leavening agent here? Is there any baking powder? No. Where else do we have the leavening agent? No more. Can you guess? Yeah. So how is it leavened? By the steam, because there's so much water, 1-to-1 ratio. For every 1 cup of flour, use 1 cup of water. So there's so much water. If you put it in the hot oven, the water turns into steam. And it creates this big cavity inside the popover. And you get to see it next week. Actually, it tastes very good, and especially for breakfast. The Europeans put butter and jam if you want, or just butter. Or you could serve it with roast beef. Okay, and the leavening agent is steam now. Okay, there's no leavening agent, no baking powder, no baking soda. And how do you mix it? What is the methodology for making it? It's the same as the muffin method. All the dry ingredients together, all the wet ingredients together, you mix the two. What it is the high moisture content of the batter allows the gluten particle to basically float in the liquid. So the gluten strands never get developed to the stage because they're not sticky. It's not sticky. They don't stretch to give a tough product. Instead, they don't stick to each other. They don't adhere to each other. And it just floats. The gluten just floats in water. So you can mix it for as long as you want. It's interesting because there's so much water. You never get to a sticky consistency. So much water is basically mixing water with a little bit of flour. So the gluten strand just floats and never stick together. You could stir as long as you want. Does not matter. Amount of stirring is not important. And what is it that gives the structure of that big volume? It's from the eggs. It's from the eggs. Take a look. How many eggs? For every 1 cup of flour to 1 cup of liquid, look, 2 to 3 eggs. So it's very eggy. That's why it tastes really good. I really like popover. It's eggy. If you like to eat eggs, and I do, it tastes really good, I've thought. So egg is essential to give the structure. So this is why the scientific principles in making popover is very different than making a muffin. The leavening agent is different. So what is the leavening agent in a muffin or pancake? Baking powder. What is the leavening agent in this popover? Steam, because there's so much water, 1-to-1 ratio. Okay? So let's take a look to see. I think we could just go ahead. And for next week, I'm going to ask you just to use this recipe. Because I did ask last few years, this is the first time I taught lab, I did ask the lab instructor what recipes did they use for popover. And I think Sarah Joseph said that they just use this recipe that's in my class, my lecture. And it's very simple. Take a look. Okay. And I think if it works, it's been tried out, we might as well use this. 2 cups of take a look at the ratio. 1-to-1 ratio, yeah?
This might defeat the purpose, but can you use whole wheat flour?
We will talk about whole wheat flour in a little while. When you make whole wheat flour, it's a very good question. Let's start with muffin. If you put whole wheat flour there, sure, you can make whole wheat. The problem with whole wheat flour is that, remember, whole wheat is made of the whole kernel, wheat kernel. So there are a lot of rough particles. So the rough particles basically will pierce this. So you're not going to get you're going to get more of a low volume whole wheat muffin because of the roughage of the particles. But it's still good and healthy for you. That's why whole wheat bread also, you're going to get less volume. At home, I have a bread machine. If I make bread, I always make whole wheat, even though I know the volume is not as good. But the taste is good, and there's no substance to it. Yes?
I heard when you make popovers, you have to put the whatever you're baking them in the oven to preheat.
Oh, preheat. You always have to preheat the ovens anyway.
Yeah, but do you have to preheat the pan with it so the pan's hot?
Of course. You could.
It's not just a...
You could, but let's try without it to see whether we could do that. But I know for Yorkshire pudding, yes, preheating, they do preheat. But I like to know what the difference is. But of course, the flame is so high. So what is the temperature? That's very high. So I would think that could quickly heat the pan. But if you preheat the pan, it's even better. It preheats it even faster. But let's see. If you do experimental foods, it's a good project to do what the difference is. Sure. Anything that you could preheat will get the temperature even higher and faster. Right? Okay. So where was I? Here. So the recipe, 2 cups of milk to 2 cups of flour. It could be bread flour too, all-purpose or bread flour, because bread flour is going to stretch more. Okay, you could try it, but it might be tougher. I haven't made it with bread flour, but I know that people have made it for the volume. Okay, and later on when we talk about yeast bread, it's an entirely different ball game because it's yeast, so it's very different. So far, we're only talking about the quick breads, these. So the methodology is the same. Basically, you combine all of the dry ingredients, which will be salt, the flour, okay, the eggs, preheat this, use the muffin method, fill the batter to the top. Muffin method, I didn't even tell you how to do it. It's the same. All the dry ingredients together, all the wet ingredients together, and you mix the two. And if you fill the batter almost to the top, then you're going to have even a larger volume. So when you take it out, it's just very impressive to see this big, big hat, like, cauliflower-y like. Okay, big, huge. The larger is the volume, the better it is. And don't open the oven door, especially during the first part. You want it to congeal. You want it to gelatinize. You want it to be basically almost cooked, because otherwise it might collapse. So once you put it in 450, don't open the door for about 15 minutes. That initial spout of hot air is very important to get the initial volume for 15 minutes. And then you reduce the heat to 375. At 375, you bake for another 20 minutes or 25 minutes. Okay. And then you get it golden. It's very easy to make, and you get a golden brown, right? And it should be golden brown outside, and the inside will be airy. And you still have the film, the egg film inside, and somewhat eggy in taste. It's very delicious. So we will do that next week. So popover is done the quick method. I might ask you, what methodology do you use? quick method, just like this, quick bread method like this, popover, pancakes, and muffins. Okay, what kind of leavening agent, and you've got it all now, right? Okay, now, can I move to the next one? I added cream puff. Cream puff is almost like popover, but the methodology is very different. Somebody invented the making of cream puff, which is now almost universal. Eclairs will be the French eclairs, will be the cream puffs that we have. Profiterole, a lot of different names. And now we have several new products, also cream puffs. They're selling so well. They made a lot of money from what I heard. They're putting, because the middle part is hollow. It's a big cavity. So you could put in ice cream and stirred custard, or all kinds of cream custard or whatever you have. And you could put chocolate, confection sugar on top. Okay, let's take a look at the recipe now. It's also 1-to-1 ratio. So when it's 1-to-1 ratio, what is the leavening agent? Steam, because that's a lot of water there. So leavening agent is still steam. So but take a look. It's very rich compared with popover. Look, half a cup of butter and 4 eggs when you eat it. I hear a lot of, there's a new store, I think, in the mall downtown that sell miniature, were you going to leave? That's okay. No, you're not. Okay, then I'll lock you in. It's a recess now. And they sell them so well. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, liquid to flour is the same as popover. So the leavening agent is steam. Very high temperature at the beginning. But the only difference between popover and cream puff is 8 times as much fat. Look at all the butter you use. Okay, so it's very tender, a lot more tender than popover. Popover really is a bread. Okay, the English people like it for breakfast, and they put butter on top, just like we use toast as breakfast. And look at the large amount of eggs. 4 eggs to be used in this particular large amount of eggs to emulsify the fat. So the methodology is very unique. Somebody invented this, and it's used as a dessert, high in fat. And then they're putting a lot of either ice cream or pudding or whatever sweet cream that you have. The method is very unique. You have to follow this. And whoever is going to be working on this, if you are in my lab, I like to follow you very closely to make sure we get it right. Otherwise, it's waste of the ingredients. It would still be good experience for students. I always tell students, even if the product failed, as long as you explain why it failed and what kind of a standard product should it be, as long as you explain it, you get full credit just the same. Okay. Methodology is unique. You melt the fat in hot water. And then you put flour in, all at once, and you stir very vigorously. Stir it all in. And you heat it continuously until the batter gets smooth. And it forms, I could watch it with it, it should form a stiff ball. Okay? And now you want to cool it a little bit. Don't add the eggs in, because if you add the eggs in at too high a temperature, you're going to curdle the eggs. Remember, eggs should always be tempered with temperature. So you have to cool it down a little bit so that it's not 212 or boiling. It has to be lower to at least 160 lower. And then now you add eggs, 1 at a time. Each time you add an egg, you have to beat it until it's smooth again. So beat thoroughly after each addition, and then you add another egg, and you beat it again. And you add the 3rd egg, and you beat it again. So the batter should be nice and smooth and glossy and stiff. You could tell you could still form a ball. If it's too liquidy, that means the methodology somehow was not followed, and it's not going to be the same product by the time you bake it. So you have the thick batter, and it's almost like a dough. And you use this batter, you use a spoon to drop the batter in mounds, in just clumps, small clumps here, depending on how big you want the cream puff to be. Here, you want to leave enough room in between because it's going to expand, it's going to explode, expand. It's going to be huge. And do it on an ungreased pan is better because it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to stay there. Okay? And you have to allow space for expansion. Make sure you allow enough space in between because it's for a small batter like this, it's going to grow up to be like this. So that's the space you need to allow from one dot of the batter to another dot. And now you preheat. Take a look at the temperature, 450 degrees. So you bake it for 15 minutes at this very high temperature, and then you lower the heat right away to 375, 430. So the methodology from here on is very similar to popover. But popover is not cooked, and this is half cooked. This is cooked. Of course, it's going to get baked again, but this is done in a saucepan. So you melt the fat in hot, basically in a double boiler, hot water, flour added all at once. You heat until the batter is smooth. It forms a very stiff ball, and then you slowly cool it. While you're cooling it down, then you add 1 egg at one time and thoroughly beat so that it's still smooth. It's a very smooth dough, very smooth batter. It's not the same as a quick bread. Okay, so it's not lumpy. It is smooth. It has to be smooth, stiff, and glossy. Then you know that the consistency is right. You put the dot, okay, and when you bake it, when you serve it to guests, it's basically all guests will like it. If you don't want to, you could put ice cream in it. You could put whipped cream in it. Okay, you could put stirred custard. We already talked about stirred custard. It has to be make sure it's made right. Okay, and then and you could drizzle with chocolate on the top, like eclairs, or chocolate sauce on the plate. Okay, everybody likes this. You know why? Because the flavor is so good. It's got a lot of butter. It's got a lot of eggs. Just don't eat too much. So, oftentimes, I used to put menus on the Vista menu, and we had profiterole. I always say miniature. So the chef still made 3 miniature. 3 looks really good. Okay, and he would have one with this filling, chocolate, one with vanilla filling, one with vanilla 3 filling, but all miniature size would be good. 1 mouthful is one profiterole was very good. Okay, if you have any questions, the methodology is very similar because then remember it's a cooked batter. Okay, and if you could do well, you serve it to your guests. Wow, what a treat to your guests. You have any questions this far? I was thinking I have time to briefly go over this with you so that at least with this, okay, quick breads, here are all of these 4 different products. The first and the second pretty much are the same, okay? The batter would be very sticky. So make sure you don't over stir, unless if you like it to be chewy, okay? These 2, and of course, there is baking powder there. You need the leavening agent is here, baking powder. You don't want to stir it too much, and this is a typical cauliflower looking like muffin, okay? So not too sweet, not too much fat, and a breakfast item would be good. These 2, if you take a look at the ratio, 1 to 1. twice as much water. So that's why we don't have to worry about gluten, because the gluten strands really don't have a chance to stick together. You need a sticky consistency for the gluten strands to stretch. Remember we talked about stretching for them to be aligned? Excuse me. So when there's so much water, the gluten strands basically float on the top. So you don't have to worry. You could mix as much as you possibly can, but we take advantage of the water here and also the water here to use water or steam. Steam is a leavening agent. Then you don't need, there's no other leavening agent here. And you could build up such beautiful volume, huge volume, a large popover, a large cream puff. But this is always fatty. If I asked you, what would be this product? Also 1-to-1 ratio, and I gave you 4 eggs, I gave you 4 tablespoons. What is this product? You should be able to know. 1-to-1 ratio has to be either this or this, but it has a lot of fat, a lot of eggs, cream puff. Otherwise, smaller amount, but you do need enough eggs because it's the eggs that gives you the structure. Okay? Can we move on now to the next product? I was looking at the time, so we're halfway through with the class. Now we could go on to conventional cake. So next week, let's see. Cake, conventional cake. Nowadays, if you ask people to make a cake, birthday cake and all, generally speaking, they use cake mixes. For a while, cake mixes were not very good, and a product would not be good. If you make it from conventional method, the cake will be so much better, generally speaking. But I found the cake mixes actually have improved a lot. They've had so many food scientists working on it. It is not so bad. However, the best cake is like typically the birthday cake that you buy at an expensive store. Should be very velvety, very tender crumb. It basically melts in your mouth without having you chew. It just melts in your mouth. And that's what we call the conventional cake. And you have to pay, of course, labor and high price for it. Okay, conventional cake, the volume, because it's so light, the volume doubles with baking. So if your batter comes up to this much in the cake pan, you know it's going to double. It's going to come up to this. You could pretty much account for another 100% rise. Okay. The air cells are small, very even, small. So it's not one big air cell and another small one. They're pretty much even, well distributed, with no tunnels. You have to make it in such a way, no tunnels. Each time you see tunnels, it's already too tough. Remember, because gluten strands are tough. This is what we're trying to avoid. Okay? But, of course, with all-purpose flour, you're bound to have gluten, but here with cake, you use cake flour without much protein, so without the gluten strands. So it'd be really tender. So the cake should be very tender. That's a characteristic. If I ask you characteristics, it should be very tender. And it's made with cake flour with very little protein, so that there's very little chance, no chance, or very little chance to have the gluten strands to develop into tough strands. It should be extremely easy to cut. You don't even have to cut. You use a cake knife, serrated knife. You basically put a knife there, the knife already goes down. It should be that tender, light, and with a lot of air, of course, easy to cut, and easy to bite. You don't even need to bite, it melts in your mouth. And you don't need to chew it, you already taste it. And that's what a typical conventional way of making cake would be. And next week we'll be making that. So next week you'll be making cakes and quick breads. Let's take a look at the recipe. The recipe is a little different. Remember we said 2 to 1 was an all-purpose flour. Remember for the muffins, this is 3 cups of cake flour, not all-purpose flour, cake flour, to 1 cup of milk. Okay. The methodology is it's different. So it's not the quick mix method. It's not the quick method. We'll talk about the methodology later. So baking powder is 3 teaspoons. What is baking powder for? Leavening agent, right. And if we just look at remember earlier, I showed you 1 cup of flour to 1 to 2 teaspoons of baking powder, remember? For quick breads, for every 1 cup of flour, generally speaking, you use about 1.5 teaspoons to 1 to 2 teaspoons, somewhere there. Right. But if you take a look at this, cake flour, 3 cups to 3 teaspoons. So what are we talking about? So we're using the much lower end. We don't use a lot of baking powder for the leavening agent part. Okay. So a very little baking powder. So what is a leavening agent? If I ask you for a cake recipe, excuse me, what is the leavening agent? Baking powder. If I ask you, what is the second leavening agent there? If I'm looking at this, baking powder is not quite enough, right? Compared with the other ratio, right? Not quite enough. The second leavening agent would be air. I probably would ask you for that. And I will tell you how air is introduced. Okay. Salt, we always put a little bit of salt. Salt seems to heighten the flavor, even though you have sugar there, just a little bit. Okay. Sugar, of course, is for taste. It's a dessert. Okay, 1.5 cups. Fat, 1/2 cup. It's a little bit more rich dessert, but it's not as high as a cream puff. Okay, 1/2 cup of fat, and 2 eggs. Of course, you need to have the structure. 2 eggs needed there for flavor and the structure of the cake. And flavoring could be vanilla or lemon or whatever cake that you're making. Okay, so we might come back to this, but let's see how we're going to prepare conventional method of making cake. We use medium oven temperature. Medium oven temperature is what? 350. That's moderate temperature, 350. So we already know how to measure ingredients. Okay, measure the ingredients accurately. We already got the ingredients earlier. Make sure, especially for cake flour, sometimes they ask you to sift cake flour, not just once, twice. Some of the recipes will ask you to sift it 3 times to introduce more air to it, because air is a secondary leavening agent. So measure the ingredients accurately. Choose a correct size pan, not too small, not too big. Basically, you know it's going to expand about 100%. So if you're using the round cake pans, fill it no more than half, because it's going to expand another 50%, another 100% is what it is. So fill it only to half, so the size has to be not too small. By the way, today in our lab, I asked students to use only half a recipe. So that's why the volume would not be as good as a full recipe. When you have only half of a recipe, you know, it just doesn't have a chance to cling up. The more you have, actually, the easier it is to cling on to the side. We'll talk a little bit more about how the batter can cling on to the side of the pan to build volume. So line the bottom of the cake pan with parchment paper cut to fit. You know what a cake pan looks like? Regular, is it here? No. It's round. It's round. It's about this high. It's round. I didn't get a chance. Sometimes I bring it to class to show you. And you'll see it next week when you make cakes. Okay, round pan, and it's flat at the bottom. Okay, round. Okay. And so what's best, this is what I do, and I highly recommend this. Line the bottom of the cake pan with parchment paper that's cut to fit. So I think I could go on to the next slide showing you. This is parchment paper. You put the cake pan, this is the cake pan. It should be straight up, about this high. And you put it on parchment paper, put a pencil around it. You want to measure this and line this with pencil at the bottom, outside, and you cut the round shape to fit the bottom of the cake pan. And once you've done that, then you lightly grease. That's what I like to do. You lightly grease one side of the paper, parchment paper. Okay. And if you want, you could grease the other side too. But I felt that it's good enough just to grease one side, which is the bottom part. Because it's so easy. There's already fat in the batter. You could easily remove the paper anyway. The reason why I suggest that we do it, and most people suggest that you do it, because today, you know, it's very difficult to remove the angel food cake and the sponge cake out. So with all of the groups, 5 groups, I did it for them because the students were worried that they would cause the whole cake to collapse, which is true. We're bound to lose some volume. But I was able to use force. I had to use force, first of all, to run a knife around it, actually a spatula around it, and then kind of dig underneath. And then when I think it's about loose, then I flip it over, and I just basically pound it on the table. And some of the students would jump. Oh, are you breaking up my cake? And then it flipped over nicely with a crumb on the top. Okay, so you lightly grease it, then it's not so difficult. All you have to do, run the knife around, you flip it over because it's already greased at the bottom. So it's very much easier to do. So I highly recommend you do that next week. So you don't have to dig under. You can't, otherwise you can't remove it well. Okay? And now, let's take a look at the recipe. It says cake flour, 3 cups, baking powder, 3 teaspoons, salt, 1/2 teaspoon. Now we sift the cake flour. If you want to sift it twice, you're introducing more air to it. If you sift it once, it's fine if the recipe says that. Sometimes the recipe asks you to re-sift. What I do is I sift it once, cake flour, onto the paper, and I measure it. I put it in a bowl along with the baking powder, which I sift again in case they get clumpy. You know, you get clumps every once in a while, especially in humid weather. Make sure to get the clumps out, and salt. And I often would re-sift everything together again the second time to introduce more air to it. Okay? So sifting and spooning once is a standard way in the United States, the United States way of making anything from recipes. Why? Any leavening agent, if I ask you why, what is the most important reason for sifting flour? Introduce air as a secondary leavening agent. Secondary leavening agent. Any leavening effect? Definitely so. Okay? And here, sift the dry ingredient. I did say, okay, sift all the dry ingredients together to evenly blend it. You could sift it again if you want. That means you're sifting it twice. Cake flour is very low in protein compared with all-purpose flour, and high in starch. We knew that. So when it's low in protein, what does it not have? We don't have to worry about. Huh? Gluten, you don't have to worry about gluten. The gluten comes from the protein part. It doesn't have as much protein. So generally speaking, if you use cake flour, it's going to be nice and tender anyway. Okay? So you should have a tender crumb because cake flour is low in protein and high in starch, and that's what you want. A typical, like why is it that pastry stores can make so much money from cake? Because they have a way of making cake that we don't know how to make, or all of us, may not know how to make as well as they do. They've perfected to such a way that their cake crumb is so tender, is so velvety, as I said, that nobody else can make it as well as they do. Okay? So they've perfected it to a way that they could charge a lot of money for whatever wedding cake that they're selling you. Okay, this is something you need to know. Those 3 attachments. If you're dietetic students, I heard that that's a question that's in quite a few. I heard that the 2-to-1 ratio was asked in the dietetics RD exam. The sticky ratio. Do not overstir. And that's the quick bread. If you're how many are dietetic students? Oh, yeah. And this is another question that they'll ask. What are the 3 attachments? They'll ask you. The wire whip, the flat beater, the dough hook. Of course, the dough hook is the easiest one. The dough hook is for kneading bread. Dough hook is for kneading bread. Okay, the wire whip. What is a wire whip for? Today we use a wire whip because we were beating what? Sponge cake. What were we beating? Egg white, foam the egg white. So we use wire whip for egg white. But we use wire whip also for the egg yolk because we were trying to get the volume. That's what that is for. Okay. The second one is the flat beater. What is a flat beater for? Flat beater is for mixing cake or whatever mixing. It's a generic beater, actually, is what it is, too. So mixing the batter. Okay, so those 3, you should know what these attachments are for. Okay, now let's start from the beginning of making a cake. We had the recipe already. The first thing we do is to take the fat. Now, what should we do? What kind of fat should we use? Should we use butter? Should we use lard? Should we use shortening? Should we use oil? What should we use? I could tell you, unfortunately, there is not a single answer that's the best. This is why I always say, I mentioned a couple of times, if there's a food chemist that could come up with the best fat that's still plastic in nature and that could incorporate air, so it has to be semi-solid is what it is. We have not had a product that's semi-solid. You either have to use butter, okay, or you have to use shortening, which is a trans fat. So what fat would you use? Right now, what would you use? Because you have butter for flavor. And also butter gives you enough plasticity. Not as good as shortening. Shortening is great when you beat it. It's like you're beating the rubber, your tender, it just flows with you, whatever you want. Butter, you have to wait until it's the right consistency. You beat it, but butter gives you the best flavor. And you know what might be the best? Because I do. Before I used to try to use just the shortening until we found out about the trans fat, which is not good. And butter has good flavor, but does not incorporate air as well, half and half. I still do. Gives you enough butter flavor, half butter and half, try it, shortening. Yeah?
Can you still buy, so Crisco is trans fat?
Trans fat.
And you can still buy it?
Oh, yeah. There's no other choice. That's why. I don't know why it would take them so long, years. And we still have not come up with a product that's not hydrogenated, unfortunately. Lard would have been really flavorful if it's fresh lard, but we've done away with lard a long time ago. We don't want lard. Bad for you. Goes rancid easily. Bad for you. Pork fat. Who wants pork fat? But it really gives you the, when we work on pastry, there's nothing better than lard. That's why the good old ancestors of yours have always sworn by lard only for pastry. We'll talk about that next time, next lecture. But for cake, you could use either shortening or butter or half and half. It's up to you. Okay? But you've got to have semi-solid or somewhat, you have to have some solid fat there to incorporate. When you beat something, you cannot beat oil. Oil is not plastic, it's liquid. So you beat the shortening. Right now it says shortening, okay? And you add the sugar slowly and gradually to aerate the mixture. Because it's plastic in nature, it's going to introduce air to it. You aerate the mixture, you put it in evenly, distribute the air into the fat. And so this particular procedure, the creaming process actually is the most important procedure in the entire recipe. Because this procedure will actually give you a very fine structure of the final product to the baked cake. And also, when you beat or cream the fat, what are you introducing into it? You've got fat here, about this big much. You've got sugar added, and after you cream it really well, it becomes this big. So what's in it? Air. That's why if I walk around, if you are making cake, all I have to do is walk around. The stage to watch is the creaming stage. How well you're able to cream air into the product, your fat. And sometimes when you see a mass about this big, and I say, this is great. You're going to get a good product. Just watch the rest of the step, you get a good volume. Because it's all air inside, even though you have leavening agent. This is why, remember I said, there's very little baking powder in it. Only a fraction, because you don't need that much baking powder. Because you've got the secondary leavening agent, which is air. The air, secondary product, the air that's introduced in beating, creaming, and also the air that's introduced when you what? Sift. When you sift the flour once or twice, sometimes they sift it 3 times. Okay, so today's recipe, one of the recipes asks you to sift it what? 3 times, 4 times, even 5 times. It's all, they say, what on earth is that? They have already, you have sifted all the dirt out. What else is you asking us to sift? It's introducing air. Okay, so this procedure will give you very fine cell structure to the bake. Very important. The most important leavening effect, actually, to a good quality wedding cake that they could demand very high price for. Okay, let's see. The next slide. Let me see. Now I have time. Now, after you've done that, incorporated the sugar. Let me just take a good look at it. You've incorporated all the sugar into the fat, as I said. The final product of this is a big mass. Okay, but I can tell by walking around whether you're going to get a good product just at that particular stage. So it takes a little patience, a little time. Allow air to go in. Now you add eggs and vanilla in 2 portions. You beat well after each addition. Now, when you add eggs and vanilla, you're going to lose some volume. But we're going to try not to lose too much. The less volume you lose, the better it is. Okay? Vanilla will blend in with the shortening. You add a little bit of flavor. You need eggs because eggs have protein. It adds flavor and adds color to the final product also. So you beat those two ingredients, eggs and flavoring in. Now you're at the last stage. You add the rest of the dry ingredients in one bowl and the milk. So you have the wet ingredient, which is milk, and you have the dry ingredients, which is a cake flour, baking powder. Baking powder will give you, of course, the leavening agent and a little bit of salt. Now, some recipes will ask you to put half of it in once and the dry ingredients in, and then you add the liquid and then half of it. I've asked you here to do, I usually add 1/3 of the dry ingredients in first. Add 1/3 of the flour mixture, the dry ingredients, and then beat until it's well mixed. You don't want to overmix, but you want it to be well mixed. And then you add half of a liquid, basically alternating. And then you add half of the liquid, which is milk, and you beat it to mix well. Okay? And then you repeat it again, okay, milk. And then you end with, and then you end with 1/3 flour. What I like to suggest is you start with dry ingredients, you end with dry ingredients. And that seems to be a better approach. That means each time you add liquid, I felt that the emulsion or the mass has started to break down. So once you add flour, then it comes back, the consistency comes back. So start with flour, you end with flour, seems to give me a better product. Each time you add milk to it, of course, milk will hydrate the flour. It dissolves the sugar, of course, and you've added the liquid. So the first part of the leavening effect is going to take place. So you see bubbles starting to come up. So at this stage, you should be working pretty swiftly. I mean, don't take time and let it sit, because these bubbles are valuable leavening effect. The bubbles are starting to come up. So you see the carbon dioxide production from the baking powder already being produced. Okay, flour, of course, gives, let me see, where am I forget my, okay, flour, of course, gives the structure to the cake. So you start with flour, and then you end with flour, and in between put the liquid. And then you could beat just to make sure you blend all the ingredients in and to aerate a little more. The batter should be nice and smooth, medium thick, already thick consistency, medium thick, and very creamy in appearance. Now, once it's that, then you're ready. Beat it to that, you're already ready. Do not overbeat. If you overbeat for another 10 minutes, you're going to toughen it. It's going to be chewy, maybe. Like what you said, it could be chewy. Why is that? If you overbeat any flour, even though this is cake flour, it has less protein now. It still has some protein. Cake flour has least protein, but there is protein. So you don't want to overbeat, because the protein can develop into gluten strands, which could toughen it. You don't want to overbeat it. But you do need to beat it enough for it to be creamy. It should be a nice big mass that's nice and thick. You could already tell whether it's going to be a good product or not by now, by looking at the batter. The larger the volume, the better it is. The better is the consistency, the better. Now you fill the cake pan, no more than half full. Half full, like this. This is a cake pan. So no more, because you know it's going to go up 100%, right? You bake until it's done. Do not open the oven door until you could smell the aroma of the cake. That means it's pretty ready. Because especially if it's just starting to climb up and it's still moist, once you open the door, there's a draft of air going in, and it's going to collapse. Because you do everything you can not to disturb the volume and not to disturb the leavening effect of the air. Actually, there's some moisture there, too. There's some steam there, too, in addition to the baking powder. So if I were to ask you for cake, what is the main ingredient, main leavening agent in cake making? What is the main leavening agent that you already have there in the recipe? Baking powder. That is the most effective one. Gives you the baking powder, which starts as soon as liquid is added. The action already starts. You can see the carbon dioxide already coming up. Okay? What is the secondary leavening agent in cake making? Air, because of the beating process. Your creaming process, you're beating so much air. And I could ask a tertiary leavening agent there. Is there another one that will give you something also? What is it? Is there any liquid there? Huh? Yeah, the milk. Yeah. The milk will give you a little bit. There's some steaming effect from the liquid. But of course, that would be a tertiary or the last. Not as important as the other two. But I don't think I'll get to this. I doubt that I will ask you this. But I'm just saying in a class that this is also a small contribution of the leavening effect. So now you could test for the doneness. How do we test for the? When you start smelling the aroma, that means it's already pretty much done. So how do you test it? When you open, don't open until the very end. That's what the glass door is always good. You could see it starts to brown, and you open the door. You use a toothpick. Toothpick is good because you don't interfere, not with a knife. A knife would be okay with custard, baked custard. Toothpick would be good. Insert a clean toothpick into the center of the cake. Okay. If the crumb does not stick to it, if it comes out clean, that means it's ready. The cake is done. Okay. And the baking reaction, of course, carbon dioxide production, that's the main leavening agent of the cake. Okay. What happens is the gluten, even though it's cake flour, there's some gluten there, and also there's egg protein there. They stretch and they combine with the liquid and the starch and all that, and they all get together and they coagulate. Okay. And then you have some starch, of course, from the cake. The cake is very starchy. It's cake flour, less protein and more starch. Starch begins to gelatinize. Once you have liquid, it gelatinizes. And then the cake browns. The browning effect is the non-enzymatic. It's not from fruits or vegetable. Non-enzymatic, it's called the Maillard reaction. So the browning effect is what smells good and also looks good, makes the cake more palatable also. And the standard of conventional cake is that the exterior, the volume should double. The surface is brown with a dull sheen and a dry appearance. And the top should be somewhat flat or slightly rounded only. If it's rounded like that and it peaks, something's wrong. You've already overbeaten it. The gluten strands have gone to one end. You have tunnels created from this. Okay, you've overstretched it. But I doubt it because there isn't that much protein there in cake flour. The air cells should be small, evenly distributed. This is why a perfect cake is so wonderful. And up until now, the cake still is the best thing to serve, right? At wedding day, something sweet, and it is so delightful, so tender, okay? And the mouth feels so delicate, moist, it's springy. The flavors, yes, it's sweet, it's a dessert, mild, and you could always add almond to have almond, coconut, a different flavor to it, orange, whatever, chocolate, whatever you have to it. And it's still one of the best desserts to be served for special occasion, whether it's anniversary or wedding or whatever. And I think this is it. Let me see. Since I have time, let me just, anything that I had missed earlier for cake. This we already just talked about. This cake recipe, if you take a look at the ingredients, okay, you see that we do use baking powder, but it's not in the proportion of the quick breads because we have additional leavening agent, especially air, which plays a significant role because the creaming process is so important. Okay, the rest is, there's some eggs and all that, but this is okay. So, I meant to, after the cake is done, what I do is that it's so easy to lift this. So you could bake 2 layers of chocolate cake and from one batch, and bake 2 layers of regular white cake or vanilla or yellow cake. And you could eat, because it's so easy to lift this. I usually freeze this. If I freeze it a few days ahead of time, because it's easy for me to slice, I slice it into half. Then I have a layer of chocolate, a layer of white, a layer of chocolate, a layer of white. Very pretty. And you could put chocolate icing or vanilla or cream icing. Okay. Or if you want to be fancier, when it's frozen, you could even slice it into 3 slices. Then you have white chocolate repeated again, and you got it. You have it higher, but of course you still have to put filling in between. You could put what kind of filling in between? Chopped strawberry, apricot preserve if you want, and then sometimes in between to make it even more moist, to make it even tastier. Then if it's apricot, you put some apricot on top of the cake to tell people it's apricot cake. If it's strawberries in between, you put a little bit of garnish with strawberries to tell people it's strawberry, and you cut into it. It's a nice surprise. You got every other layer like that. The only way you could do it is to do this, because you could easily lift this. Once you lift this, you remove the parchment paper, you slice into, the first time, just slice it in half. Then you get smarter, you could slice in 3 times, but then it could get thicker and thicker, so the cake would be this. But wow, your guests will love it because of nice flavor, whether it's jam. I make my own jam from fruit because we have some fruit trees in the back, a plum or whatever it is, peach or whatever it is, and it's wonderful. You have nice preserves in between, and I like whipped cream for frosting. I don't like the butter cream, but whatever you like, and your guests will tell you that it's out of the way, out of the world, the cake. So here, sifting flour, it's important. So that sifting is one way of introducing air, right? And when you beat is another way of introducing air, right? Creaming it. Okay. And when you cream it, you're aerating it again. So air really is a very important leavening agent also. The more air you can introduce, the better it is. And then you add eggs and flour to it. When you add it, try not to beat out all of the air, only until you beat it well until everything's mixed. Don't overbeat. Because if you overbeat, that means you're beating a little bit of the protein, the gluten strands, which will toughen it. And now you add the flour in with the rest. We talked about that. Start with dry ingredients. You end with dry ingredients, I think is the best way. And you beat it to blend, to aerate, but not to overbeat. And fill the cake pan half full and put it in the oven. And toothpick says it's ready. And all you have to do is run a knife, a paring knife around, or a dull knife around it. And now you cool it on the rack. When it's cool, you flip it over, take off when you flip it over, you got a piece of paper, of course, the lining paper. Remove the paper that you put in there, and you could, it's very difficult for me to make a cake from a warm cake. I wait until it's cold. I like to freeze it just a little so that I can handle it so much better. So when you put icing on or cream on, it's just so much easier to handle it. And you can do riding on top, okay? But the cake should be nice and tender, and the crumb is also wonderful. And carbon dioxide, of course, all of these factors are very important to make a perfect cake. So this is a conventional way of making cake. And I might want to bring a cake mix in for somebody to make a cake from a cake mix. And we could evaluate the difference between the two. But of course, they have advanced their technology in giving you a good cake mix, a box of good cake mix. And we could evaluate to see which one is better. Of course, the conventional method, I wouldn't be teaching you all this if it's not the better way of making cake, right? And this is because the other is just basically mixing it. Okay, we'll see. And the flavor, we'll compare the two. Okay, so next week we'll be doing that. Cakes and quick breads. Quick breads include either pancakes or muffins, probably muffins. And we'll do cream puffs, and we'll do popovers. A lot of fun. Okay, so we see you next time. Oh, yeah, I did work with, early in the morning, I did work with academic technology, and a few students who complained about not being able to see your grades. Okay, so everything's fixed, so I hope you can see all of your grades now.